Yo, what is up guys? It's Pedro here, and in today's video I want to talk about the Washington Commanders defense and how it's actually better than you might think, and they might not need as much work as a lot of Commanders fans think. If you guys are new, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button and that notification bell as well so you never miss a video. And no, I'm not saying this defense is elite or they don't need work at all, because it's far from it. But I think we can all agree under Dan Quinn, this defense has been a lot better than what it was under Joe Witt. Under Joe Witt, we had a lot of really bad weeks. I mean, we can go through the schedule here and just look at the games the Commanders played. And, the beginning of the season with the injuries, it wasn't too bad, but it still wasn't great. Then, the Falcons, you allowed 34 points. The Chargers was good. Then once you start to get the Bears game, allowed 25, then you allow 44, 28, but could have been way more, 38, 44. And then you switch to Dan Quinn, and it's 16 points, and then 27 points against a 10-2 team, and it was in 5 quarters. I mean, it's not like the Broncos are lighting things up. I mean, let's look at their, schedule, but they're not a bad offense. They're not a great offense though. Like, they win close games, but they've put up 44, they put up 33, 29, 27 against us. So again, I'm not saying this is a good defense, but if it was 3 weeks ago, and if we played the Broncos 3 weeks ago, I think maybe the Broncos would have scored 40 plus on us. And I think instead of the Commanders being probably the worst, or I guess they might not have been the worst defense even with Joe Witt. It was probably the Bengals, but they were still very bad. And I think now they're not as bad for sure, and it makes you feel a little bit better. It makes you feel a little bit better about the future of this team and this defense. Maybe you don't need a complete overhaul on the defensive side of the ball. You still need an overhaul. You still need another edge rusher, like a stud edge rusher. You need another linebacker. You need some corners, but I think that you feel good about just maybe some of these players with a new scheme and a different another off season, and being able to, I guess it's not necessarily a scheme, but new play calling, which they have had the last couple weeks. I think that can definitely help out the Commanders for sure, in the future with some of these guys, especially the young guys. Trey Amos can really ascend. I think Mikey Sainer still too. This year's been really bad for him, but last week against Denver had a solid game. Dan Quinn shouted him out. And I think that, that's something that some of these players, I think, will start to ascend without Joe Witt kind of holding them back. I think Frankie Louvu is one of those guys as well. That doesn't mean, again, like I said, they need to, that they don't need to overhaul this defense. I think, Bobby Wagner, he's cool and all, but he needs to be gone. Play, Jordan McGee, and bring in another linebacker. I would say your linebackers next year: Frankie Louvu, I still like Frankie Louvu, Jordan McGee, and then bring in a veteran. Bring in a veteran that maybe is not necessarily a stud, but a guy that just got off his first contract, so a second contract guy that's going to be in his mid-20s and can play at a decent level for you. And then you also have Cam Madrano in there, so if he ascends, he can play. If Jordan McGee maybe is not too good, then this vet can play, him and Frankie Louvu. So that's just something to consider for the Commanders. And I think that Bobby Wagner's got to be on his way out here with the Commanders. Same thing, we'll go over some guys like Von Miller. I'm sorry, but it's done there. Percy Butler. I mean, special teams fine. Preston Smith, no. And then no Igmanogany, I'm fine with that. Him being here. Jonathan Jones, no, he needs to be gone. Quan Martin needs to be gone. Jeremy Reeves is fine, but again, he shouldn't be getting a lot of PT on defense. He's not that good of a player on defense. He's a good special teams player though, and that is important. But in terms of his defensive skills and his strengths, or what he brings to his team, is not a lot defensively. He's a good hitter and he has a lot of effort, which is cool, but that doesn't necessarily translate to being an elite defender all the time, and for his case, it's not. So they still need to add guys on this defense, but Dorrance Armstrong coming back hopefully next year healthy will be good for this defense, will make the defense a little bit better. And then you have some other guys that are going to come back to Trey Amos, and him in his second year with better play calling could be good. Also, a better defensive line just makes things easier for the secondary for sure. and vice versa. If the secondary is good, it makes it easier for the pass rushers as well, because the quarterback is throwing the ball, has to move around a little bit more, and doesn't have an open receiver, so he's back there for a lot longer, which gives the edge rushers and D tackles a little bit more time to rush the passer. And then Deron Payne, I think he's been fine. I don't know what they want to do there, but they might want to make a move, whether it's restructuring the deal, trading him. I would not release him. I would just try to restructure, and I don't think losing him for nothing would be ideal. And I think you try to bring back Jacob Martin. He has been a really solid rusher for us. So I would say your ideal edge rushing core next year is Dorrance Armstrong, hopefully a first round rookie, Jacob Martin, maybe another veteran, and then Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Those five, or I don't know exactly how many guys I named, 4 or 5 guys. That would be a solid edge rusher room. Armstrong, hopefully someone like Reese from Ohio State, and then Baptiste and Jacob Martin and maybe a rookie. So that gives you like 5 edge rusher type of guys, and then you can bring in some new D tackles too. I mean, I guess Johnny Newton's going to stick around, but he's not had a good season by any means. So we're going to talk about that and some more guys in a little bit. But real quick, a word from today's sponsor. And a huge shout out to Sleeper for sponsoring today's video. A huge Monday night game, Patriots and Drake May, who could win the MVP, going up against division rival New York Giants. So interesting game there for sure. You can win real money making picks on Sleeper. Use promo code Pedro on Sleeper, get 100% match up to $100. Link is in the description. Terms and conditions apply. And a huge shout out to Sleeper. Make sure you guys check him out. But let's go back to this defense. I think this is unfortunate that it came to this, that Dan Quinn couldn't make this decision earlier and call the plays for the defense when some of these other guys were still healthy, like Trey Amos, Marshawn Lattimore, because the secondary was a huge disappointment. And, a lot of it was Marshawn Lattimore, Mikey Sainer still, Quan Martin. And then, Trey Amos, he was good, but he definitely had his, not so great moments. And I think with, better play calling, that could have helped out a lot too. And he was also playing hurt for a lot of this season with a bunch of different minor injuries. So, hopefully he's able to fully heal up and be good to go for, spring workouts and, OTAs and minicamp. But he's a piece I'm excited about. The piece I'm most excited about, I guess, on defense, I guess Dorrance Armstrong, Trey Amos, Jordan McGee, just because he's young and he's shown a little bit. Those guys, I like Luvu. I know a lot of people are down on Luvu, but I still think Luvu is a good player if, in a good scheme. And this year, even, it hasn't all been scheme issues and play calling issues. He's had missed tackles and stuff like that. I just hope, he's going to have a good rest of the season and a better, just a better 2026 season. But I think as of late, he's been a little bit better. And, he does have 3 sacks in the year, 2 forced fumbles. He's not, necessarily an edge rusher. So those numbers aren't bad. It's just not the type of player we had last year where he had, 8 sacks for the Commanders last year. Let's see, I'm trying to pull it up. He had 8 sacks for the Commanders last year. And overall, was just a way more of a game-changing player. So we need that the rest of the way. And, it'll be interesting to see with Dan Quinn how that kind of evolves. But if you look at the stats here, he played a little bit. Let's see, his sacks. He's had a sack here, had a sack in the Bears game and the Falcons game. So it's been, the last sack here he just had was the first one in a while, but the couple weeks before that had some TFLs. So let's see what he can do these next weeks and see if he can finish off this season strong, because he is a guy I think has a shot to still be one of the better linebackers in the league, kind of edge / linebacker type of guy. He's not necessarily a full-on linebacker, definitely not a middle linebacker, but not an off-ball guy, but he does do a little bit of everything. He can go back into coverage sometimes, but his strength is making plays at the line of scrimmage, making big run stuffs and making some big plays in the passing game in terms of sacking the quarterback as well. So that's what you want from Frankie Luvu, and I think he has a chance to be one of the better pieces on this defense. Let's see the rest of the way, and if he can be one of those guys for next year. Obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done with this defense, and they need to add a bunch of guys, but I think it's not as bad as we might have thought a couple weeks ago when we're getting 44, scored against us against the Lions. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe if you guys are new, turn on that notification bell, comment down below which player you are most excited about the rest of the way for the Commanders on the defensive side of the ball. You could say Mikey Sanders still. I wouldn't, I think that's a solid option just to see what he can do because he had a really solid first year. Second year has been bad, but maybe some new play calling, which he kind of alluded to that. He liked a comment saying that it's been the scheme. So will be interesting to see with that. And then also, Jordan McGee for me is a guy I'm really interested to see. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Peace.